The room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. In the very important person section of the Onyx room, silence was usually a precursor to violence. A terrified waiter had just spilled hot tea on the most dangerous woman in New York, Galina Vulova, the mother of the city's most ruthless Mafia Don. Guns were drawn. The waiter was sobbing. Nikolai Vulov, the Don himself, looked ready to execute the boy on the spot. But then a quiet, trembling voice cut through the tension. It wasn't begging for mercy. It was speaking in Russian. And not just any Russian. It was an aristocratic pre-revolution dialect that hadn't been heard in decades. Everyone turned. It was just the girl who cleaned the ashtrays. But what she said next would change the underworld forever. Elena had mastered the art of being invisible. In a place like the Onyx room, invisibility wasn't just a skill. It was a survival mechanism. The club, located in the dark heart of Chicago's meatpacking district, was a cathedral of sin and luxury. Velvet curtains the color of dried blood hung from the ceilings, and the chandeliers cost more than Elena would make in 10 lifetimes. It was the crown jewel of the Vulov empire. Elena adjusted her black apron, keeping her head down as she navigated the crowded floor. She was 24, with hair she kept tightly bunned and clothes that were 2 sizes too big, specifically chosen to hide her figure. She wasn't there to be noticed. She was there to pay off a debt that wasn't hers. Vance, the sharp bark of the floor manager, a sweaty man named Rickard, made her jump. Table 4 needs clearing fast. The boss is coming down from the office. Rickard hissed, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. The boss? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nikolai, he's in a mood. Don't look at him. Don't speak to him. Just clean the glass and get out. Elena nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everyone knew Nikolai Vulov. He wasn't just a mobster. He was a phantom. At 32, he had consolidated power in the city faster than anyone in history. They called him the Wolf, silent, predatory, and devoid of mercy. She hurried to table 4, a secluded booth near the back. As she wiped down the mahogany surface, the atmosphere in the club shifted. The music didn't stop, but the energy changed. The air grew heavier, colder. The double doors at the entrance swung open. 6 men walked in first. They were huge, wearing suits that cost $5,000, tailored to hide the bulges of automatic weapons. And then he walked in. Nikolai Vulov. He was taller than the photos in the newspaper suggested. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit, and his eyes were the color of ice on a frozen lake. He didn't walk. He glided, radiating a terrifying calm. Next to him was his second in command, a scarred man named Dmitri, who looked at everything like he wanted to kill it. Elena scrubbed the table harder, praying she would dissolve into the woodwork. She grabbed her tray, turning to flee toward the kitchen, but she was blocked by a wall of muscle. She bumped right into Dmitri. Watch it, Dmitri snarled, grabbing her arm. His grip was bruising. I'm sorry, sir, Elena stammered, keeping her eyes on his shoes. Clumsy American trash, Dmitri muttered in Russian, assuming she couldn't understand. No, Americans, Elena froze. The words triggered a memory she had buried deep inside her mind. A snowy courtyard, the smell of pine, a warm voice teaching her vowels. She instinctively wanted to apologize in the same language, but she caught herself. She was Elena Vance, a broke waitress from Ohio. She wasn't her. Not anymore. Let her go, Dmitri. The voice was low, smooth, and terrified her more than the shout. Nikolai had stopped walking. He was looking right at them. Dmitri released her arm immediately, shoving her aside. Just teaching the staff some respect, boss. Nikolai's eyes swept over Elena. For a second she felt exposed, as if those ice-blue eyes were stripping away the oversized uniform and seeing the secrets tattooed on her soul. But then he looked away indifferent. We have guests arriving, Nikolai said, continuing toward the very important person section. My mother is 10 minutes away. If this place isn't perfect, Dmitri, you will answer for it. The color drained from Dmitri's face. Galina is coming tonight. Yes, it is the anniversary of my father's death. She wants to drink to him here in the place he built. Nikolai paused, fixing his tie. Everything must be traditional. The samovar, the cherry preserves. Make sure the staff is competent. Elena scurried into the kitchen, her hands trembling as she dumped the dirty glasses into the sink. The kitchen was in chaos. "Galina Vulova is coming." The head chef, a frantic Italian man named Marco, was screaming, "Where is the tea set? The gold one, not the silver." Elena leaned against the cold stainless steel counter, trying to steady her breathing. She knew who Galina Vulova was. Everyone did. She was the Pahan's widow, a woman of iron and blood. Legend said she once cut the finger off a rival boss who dared to touch her hand without permission. Elena Rickard appeared again. "You're on very important person service tonight." "What?" Elena shook her head violently. "No, Rickard, please. I'm just a boozer. I don't do service. Sarah went home sick, and Jessica is too high to hold a tray." "You're the only one sober enough," Rickard snapped. "Put on a clean apron. You're taking the tea service to Mrs. Vulova." "Rickard, I can't. Do you want your job? Do you want to pay your brother's medical bills?" Rickard lowered his voice, his eyes hard. "You do this or you're out on the street tonight." Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. She thought of her brother, Leo, lying in the hospital bed, the machines beeping. She needed the money. She needed the insurance. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." She didn't know it yet, but that decision was about to end her life as Elenina Vance, the very important person section, was roped off with thick velvet cords. The lighting was dim amber and gold, designed to make everyone look beautiful and rich. Elenina stood in the shadows, holding a heavy silver tray. On it sat an antique samovar, a traditional Russian tea urn, delicate porcelain cups, and a crystal bowl of cherry preserves. Her arms ached, but she didn't dare move. The room was filled with the top lieutenants of the Vulov family, but they were all standing. No one sat until she sat. At 900 p.m., exactly, the elevator doors opened. Galina Vulova was 70, but she moved with the strength of a woman half her age. She wore black furs and diamonds that glittered like shards of ice. Her face was severe, etched with the lines of a hard life, but her eyes were sharp, hawk-like. She walked with a cane, not because she needed it, but because she liked to point at things she disapproved of. Nikolai stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. "Mama, welcome her." Galina looked around the club, her lip curling in disdain. "It smells of cheap perfume and American desperation, Nikolai." Her voice was raspy, thick, with a Russian accent. "It makes money, Mama," Nikolai replied calmly, guiding her to the center booth, the throne. Galina sat. The room exhaled. "Tay," she commanded. Rickard shoved Elena forward. "Go now." Elena stepped into the light. Her heart was beating so loud she thought the microphone on the karaoke stage might pick it up. She approached the table, keeping her eyes lowered. "Careful," Dmitri hissed from the side. Elena set the tray down. Her hands were steady, a lifetime of discipline kicking in. She began to pour the tea. The dark liquid steamed in the cold air. She placed the cup in front of Galina, then the spoon, then the preserves. She turned to leave. "Wait!" Galina's voice was like a whip crack. Elena froze. She turned back slowly. Galina was staring at the tea. She picked up the spoon, dipped it into the preserves, and then let it drop back into the bowl with a loud clink. "What is this?" Galina asked, switching to Russian. She looked at Nikolai. "Nikolai, why do you insult me?" Nikolai frowned. "Mama, it is the best cherry preserve. Imported, it is garbage," Galina screamed, sweeping her hand across the table. The cup of scalding hot tea flew off the saucer. It didn't hit Nikolai. It hit the young busboy, Thomas, who had just stepped up to offer water. The hot liquid splashed over his hand and wrist. Thomas yelped, dropping the water pitcher. Glass shattered everywhere. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas clutched his burned hand, tears streaming down his face. But he was too terrified to make a sound. Galina stood up, her face red with fury. She wasn't looking at the burned boy. She was looking at the mess on her shoes. "Idiots, imbecile, you surround yourself with incompetence, Nikolai. On your father's anniversary, you bring me peasants who cannot even serve tea." She turned her wrath on Thomas. "You ruined my shoes. Do you know how much these cost? More than your life." She raised her cane. Nikolai stepped forward, but he hesitated. He couldn't publicly humiliate his mother, But he couldn't let her beat a staff member in front of the investors. The tension was a physical weight in the room. Dmitri had his hand on his gun, unsure of who the threat was. Galina ranted on her Russian becoming faster, more obscure. She was using old idioms, cursing the bad luck of the house, cursing the lack of respect for the old ways. "No one understands," she shouted, looking at the confused faces of the American staff. "You are all hollow shells. You don't know the soul of the tea. You serve me sugar water and call it tradition. In the old country, we would have whipped you for this insolence." She raised the cane again, aiming for Thomas, who was cowering on the floor. "Stop." It wasn't Nikolai who spoke. It was Elena. She hadn't meant to say it. It was a reflex. Seeing the cane go up, seeing the fear in Thomas's eyes, it broke the dam she had built around her past. Galina froze. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing at the waitress in the oversized clothes. "What did you say to me?" Galina asked in English, her voice dangerous. Elena looked up. For the first time she made eye contact with the matriarch. She saw not just anger, but deep, profound loneliness and frustration. Elena took a breath. She knew she was about to get fired or killed, but she couldn't help it. She didn't answer in English. "Forgive the boy, matriarch," Elena said. Her voice changed. It wasn't the soft Midwestern mumble of Elena Vance. It was crisp, melodic, and perfectly enunciated Russian. "He does not understand the weight of the day. But the anger you feel is not about the shoes or the tea." The room gasped. Nikolai's head snapped toward her. Dmitri's jaw dropped. Elena continued stepping over the shattered glass, ignoring the guns that were shifting toward her. She spoke in a dialect that was rare, the St. Petersburg High Court dialect, spoken by the families that existed before the Iron Curtain fell. "You are angry because the preserves are too sweet," Elena said softly in Russian. "They used sugar, not honey, and they did not put the mint leaf in the boil. It is not how they made it in Viborg. It tastes like a lie. That is why you are angry." Galina lowered her cane. Her mouth opened slightly. The fury in her eyes was replaced by shock. Pure, unadulterated shock. "Viborg," Galina whispered. "Who told you about Viborg?" "My grandmother." Elena lied smoothly, though the emotion was real. She said that tea without the proper bitterness is like a life without sorrow. It has no depth. It was an old proverb, a very specific, very old proverb used by a specific circle of families. Galina stared at her. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 20. Then the terrifying matriarch of the Vulov family sat back down. She pointed a manicured finger at the empty seat across from her. "Sit, Galina Koman." Dead. Ricard, the manager, looked like he was going to faint. "Ma'am, she's just a shut-up." Galina barked at him. She looked at Helena. "I said sit. Nikolai, give her a fresh cup and get that boy to a doctor." Nikolai, the most feared man in Chicago, blinked. He looked at Elena with a new expression. It wasn't indifference anymore. It was calculation. He motioned for a guard to help Thomas. Then he personally picked up a clean cup. Elena sat down opposite the Mafia queen. She could feel Nikolai's eyes burning holes into the side of her head. She had saved Thomas. She had calmed Galina. But she had just made a terrible mistake. She had revealed a skill that a broke waitress from Ohio shouldn't have. And in Nikolai Vulov's world, anomalies were threats. "What is your name, girl?" Galina asked, her voice softer now, almost hungry. "Elena," she said. "Elena," Galina studied her face. "You speak the tongue of the czars. Where did you learn it?" "Books," Elena said quickly. "I just have an ear for languages," Galina laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Books. No, you can learn words from books. You cannot learn the soul of the language from paper. You have a history, Elena." Nikolai leaned in, placing the tea in front of her. His voice was low, intimate, and menacing.
"Yes, Elena, tell us. Who are you really?"
The air in the very important persons section was thick enough to choke on. Elena sat on the plush velvet seat, her oversized gray uniform contrasting sharply with the diamond-studded luxury surrounding her. Across the table, Galina Vulova sipped her tea, her eyes closed in rapture. "Perfect," Galina murmured in Russian. "It tastes like home." She opened her eyes and fixed them on Elena. "You a Read too skinny girl and you dress like a potato sack, but you have the hands of a pianist and the tongue of a poet. Tell me the truth. Who are you? Nikolai leaned back in the booth, lighting a cigarette. The smoke curled around his face, framing his cold, calculating expression. He didn't speak, but his silence was a weapon. He was waiting for her to slip up. Elena's mind raced. She couldn't tell them the truth, that her name wasn't Elena Vance, that she was the daughter of a disgraced diplomat who had been framed for espionage, that she had grown up in embassies in Moscow and Kiev before her life fell apart. If they knew who her father was, Nikolai would kill her as a risk. My grandmother, Elena, lied, sticking to her story, but embellishing it with grains of truth. She was a governess for a family in St. Petersburg before the fall. She escaped with nothing but her stories. She taught me to speak so the language wouldn't die with her. Galina studied her. A governess. That explains the diction, but it does not explain the posture. Galina tapped the table with a long manicured fingernail. Dmitri, bring the board. Dmitri, the scarred lieutenant, groaned. Galina, please, not tonight. We have business to discuss with the union reps at midnight. The union can wait, Galina snapped. I want to see if the girl's mind is as sharp as her tongue. Bring the chess set. Elena's stomach dropped. Chess. It was the one game she and her father had played every night. It was how he taught her strategy, patience, and sacrifice. But playing against the Vulovs was a trap. If she won, she humiliated the boss. If she lost badly, she proved she was useless. Dmitri placed a heavy marble chessboard on the table. The pieces were hand-carved ivory and obsidian. Play Nikolai, Galina commanded. Nikolai raised an eyebrow. Mama, I am not playing a waitress. You are playing her, Galina insisted. She fixed my tea. She calmed my nerves. Humor an old woman, Nikolai. Unless you are afraid she will beat you. A flicker of annoyance crossed Nikolai's face. He crushed his cigarette out. Fine, he gestured to the board. White moves first. Do you know the rules, Elena? Or do I need to explain how the little horse moves? His tone was condescending, dripping with arrogance. He expected her to be confused. Elena looked at the board. The world fell away. The noise of the club, the smell of smoke, the fear of death, it all vanished. There was only the grid, 64 squares, infinite possibilities. I know the rules, Elena said softly. She reached out and moved her pawn to e4. Nikolai smirked and countered instantly. The game began fast. Nikolai played aggressively, a style known as the fried liver attack. It was brutal, designed to overwhelm opponents quickly with raw power. It mirrored his personality perfectly. He didn't care about defense. He cared about crushing the enemy. For the first 10 moves, Elena played defensively, barely holding her line. Nikolai took her knight, then a bishop. You are hesitating, Nikolai said, his voice low. You play like a coward, just like you hide in that uniform. He moved his queen, checking her king. Check. Elena looked up, his eyes locked with hers. He was trying to intimidate her to break her focus. I'm not hiding, Elena whispered. I'm waiting. She moved her king out of danger. Nikolai frowned. He attacked again, but this time Elena was ready. She had baited him. By sacrificing her bishop, she had opened a diagonal line that he hadn't seen because he was too focused on the kill. Elena moved her knight. Check. Nikolai paused. He looked at the board. His brow furrowed. He moved his king. Elena moved her rook. Check. Nikolai stopped. The smirk vanished. He leaned over the board, his eyes darting back and forth. The ambient noise of the club seemed to return, rushing in. Galina was watching with a predatory grin. Nikolai realized with dawning horror that he was trapped. 3 moves ago, he thought he had her. Now his king was cornered by a web of her pieces. You, Nikolai murmured. He looked at her, really looked at her for the second time that night. Who taught you this? My father, Elena said, her voice tightening. He said that arrogance is the most expensive luxury in the world. You can't afford it. Nikolai's eyes narrowed. Is that so? He made a desperate move to save his queen. Elena didn't hesitate. She picked up her queen, the most powerful piece on the board, and slid it across the marble. She took his rook, leaving her queen defenseless. What are you doing? Dmitri asked, confused. You just lost your queen. Elena didn't look at Dmitri. She kept her eyes on Nikolai. Mate him too, she said. Nikolai froze. He traced the lines. If he took her queen, her knight would checkmate him. If he didn't take her queen, her bishop would checkmate him. It was a trap. A beautiful, brutal trap. Nikolai sat back slowly. The tension at the table was electric. A waitress, a girl who made $9 an hour scrubbing tables, had just defeated the Dawn of Chicago in fewer than 20 moves. Galina let out a loud, cackling laugh. She lapped her hands. Magnificent. Did you see that, Dmitri? She gutted him. She gutted my son like a fish. Nikolai didn't laugh. He stared at the board. Then he stared at Elena. The ice in his eyes was gone, replaced by a burning intensity that made Elena's skin prickle. He wasn't angry. He was aroused, not sexually, but intellectually. He had found a puzzle he couldn't solve. You're not a waitress, Nikolai said quietly. I don't know who you are, Elena Vance, but you are done cleaning tables. I have to get back to work, Elena stammered, standing up. The adrenaline was fading and the fear was returning. She had won, but she had exposed herself too much. Ricard will be looking for me. Ricard works for me, Nikolai said, standing up as well. He towered over her. And now so do you. I don't want trouble, Elena said, backing away. Please, I just want my paycheck. You have a debt, Nikolai said. He wasn't asking, he was stating a fact. He had pulled up her employee file on his phone under the table while they played. Leo Vance, your brother, St. Jude's Hospital, leukemia treatment. You're 3 months behind on payments. Elena's blood ran cold. How do you? I know everything that happens in my city. Nikolai stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive tobacco and cedarwood. You need $50,000 for his next round of chemo. You won't make that carrying trays. What do you want? Elena whispered. My mother likes you, Nikolai said, glancing at Galina, who was busy eating the cherry preserves with a satisfied smile. She hates everyone. But she likes you. I need a companion for her. Someone who speaks the language. Someone who can play chess. Someone who is a best. Ervant, you want me to babysit? I want you to be her personal assistant, Nikolai corrected. You will live at the estate. You will be paid $5,000 a week, and I will cover your brother's medical bills in full. Elena felt dizzy. $5,000 a week medical bills paid. It was a miracle. It was the answer to her prayers, but it was also a deal with the devil. Living at the Vulov estate meant being watched 24/7. It meant being in the center of the criminal underworld. If they found out her father was the diplomat who had tried to dismantle their operations in Eastern Europe 10 years ago, they would torture her to death. Elena hesitated. Say yes, Galina called out from the table. Say yes, girl, or I will have Dmitri break your legs for ruining my son's ego. Elena looked at Nikolai. He held out his hand. Deal? He asked. Elena looked at his hand. It was large, scarred at the knuckles, a killer's hand. She thought of Leo, pale and thin in the hospital bed. Deal, she whispered. She shook his hand. His grip was warm and firm. Good, Nikolai said. He didn't let go. Get your things. You're coming with us tonight. The transition from the warm golden light of the onyx room to the cold, biting wind of the Chicago night was jarring. Elena walked out the back exit, surrounded by the phalanx of bodyguards. She was no longer wearing her apron. She had her battered backpack over one shoulder, clutching her coat tight. She felt like a prisoner. The car's this way, Dmitri grunted, pointing toward a line of 3 black armored SUVs idling in the alley. Galina was walking ahead, flanked by 2 guards. She was humming a Russian folk song, seemingly in a great mood after watching her son lose at chess. Nikolai walked beside Elena, his presence a heavy weight on her right side. You're trembling, Nikolai noted, not looking at her. I'm cold. Elena lied. She was terrified. The car is heated, he said simply. They reached the middle SUV. A driver opened the back door for Galina. Elena scanned the alley. It was a habit her father had drilled into her. Always look for the break in the pattern. The alley was narrow, lined with brick walls and dumpsters. A single street lamp flickered overhead. It was quiet, too quiet. Usually there were homeless men near the dumpster, or the sound of traffic from the main road. Something caught her eye. On the roof of the warehouse opposite them, about 300 yards away, there was a flash, just a tiny glint of light, like a reflection of a watch face or a scope. And then she saw the red dot. It was faint, dancing through the rain, moving across the wet pavement. It wasn't aiming for Nikolai. It was aiming for Galina. Time seemed to slow down. Elena saw Galina reaching for the door handle. She saw Nikolai turning to say something to Dmitri. She saw the guards looking outward, but they were looking at street level, not the roofs. "Get down." Elena didn't think. She screamed and threw herself forward. She didn't tackle Nikolai. She tackled Galina. She hit the old woman with the force of a linebacker, driving her into the back seat of the SUV just as the crack of a high-powered rifle echoed through the alley. Crack thip. The bullet didn't hit Galina's head. Because Elena had pushed her, the bullet slammed into the frame of the car door, sending sparks and shrapnel flying. "Sniper!" Dmitri roared. Contact rear roof. Chaos erupted. The bodyguards immediately drew their weapons and opened fire toward the roof. The sound was deafening automatic gunfire echoing off the brick walls. Nikolai was moving instantly. He didn't dive for cover. He dove for Elelanina and his mother. He shoved Elelanina's legs into the car and slammed the heavy armored door shut, effectively sealing them inside the bulletproof cage. "Go drive! Drive!" Nikolai screamed at the driver, jumping into the front passenger seat. The SUV tires screeched burning rubber as the heavy vehicle lurched forward. Another bullet pinged off the back window, leaving a spiderweb crack in the reinforced glass. Inside the back of the car, it was a tangle of limbs and heavy breathing. Galina was gasping, clutching her chest. Elelanina was sprawled on the floor of the SUV, her shoulder throbbing where she had hit the doorframe. "Mama, are you hit?" Nikolai shouted from the front, turning around. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a panic Elena hadn't seen before. I am fine," Galina wheezed, straightening her fur coat. She looked down at Elena. "The girl?" Elena groaned, pushing herself up to a sitting position. "Is everyone okay?" Nikolai stared at her. The look on his face was unreadable. It was a mixture of shock, adrenaline, and something else. Respect. "You saw him," Nikolai said. "It wasn't a question. My men didn't see him. Dmitri didn't see him." "How did you see him?" Elena rubbed her shoulder. "I saw the reflection, the scope in the rain." Nikolai shook his head. "That shot came from the textile factory roof. That's 300 yards at night in the rain." He reached back and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His grip was tight, bordering on painful. "Who trained you, Elena?" he demanded. "A waitress doesn't spot a sniper before a Spetsnaz-trained security team. Who are you working for? The Moretti family, the Triads." "No one," Elena cried, pulling away. "I told you my father. He was paranoid. He taught me to watch my surroundings. That's all. I swear." Nikolai studied her face for a long, agonizing moment. The SUV was speeding down the highway, now weaving through traffic, putting distance between them and the assassin. Finally, Nikolai released her. He turned back to the front and picked up his radio. "Dmitri, report." Nikolai barked into the radio. "We lost him, boss." Dmitri's voice crackled, sounding out of breath. "He was a pro. Gone before we hit the roof, but we found a shell casing. It's custom. Looks like Luca Moretti's signature." "Moretti," Nikolai growled, slamming his fist against the dashboard. The leather creaked under the impact. "I will burn his house to the ground with him inside it. Luca Moretti, the dawn of the Italian Mafia in Chicago. The Vulovs and the Moretts had been in a fragile ceasefire for 2 years. Tonight, that peace was over. In the back seat, the adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the shakes. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. She had just been shot at. She was in a car with a mob boss who was planning a war. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her knee. It was Galina. The old woman's hand was shaking, but her grip was strong. "You saved my life," Galina said in Russian. Her voice was devoid of its usual harshness. "The bullet, it would have taken my head." Elena looked at the matriarch. "I just reacted." "No," Galina said firmly. "You acted. There is a difference." Nikolai looked back. "She's..." "Tase," Galina declared. "She does not leave my side. If she leaves, I leave." Nikolai nodded slowly. "She stays Mama, but not just as a companion." He looked at Elena, his eyes cold and hard again. "If Moretti is coming for us, we are at war," Nikolai said. "And in war, I use every asset I have. You have eyes that see what my men miss. You have a brain that beats me at chess." "So?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. So Nikolai said, "You are going to help me destroy Luca Moretti. Welcome to the family." Elena, the car sped into the night, carrying Elena further away from her old life and deeper into the abyss. She had survived the lion's den, but now she was going to war. And the scariest part wasn't the sniper or the Mafia boss. The scariest part was that for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The Vulov estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Located in Highland Park, it was surrounded by 12-feet walls and patrolled by men with earpieces and concealed weapons. For 3 days, Elena had not left the property. She had spent every waking hour with Galina. She read poetry to the old woman, reorganized her library, and most importantly, played chess. Galina was testing her, probing for weaknesses, but Elena remained a fortress of her own. On the 4th afternoon, the library doors flew open. Nikolai strode in, looking like a storm cloud in a tuxedo. "Get up," he said to Elena. "You have 2 hours." Elena marked her page in the Tolstoy novel. She was reading. 2 hours for what? The mayor's charity gala at the Navy Pier ballroom. Nikolai said, checking his watch. "Luca Moretti will be there. It is neutral ground. No weapons, no guards inside. Just the city's elite." "And you're going?" Elena asked, surprised. "After he tried to kill your mother." "I'm going to look him in the eye," Nikolai said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I need to know if he ordered the hit. Moretti is a snake, but he is a businessman. Shooting an old woman isn't business. It's suicide. Something feels wrong." He looked at Elena. "You are coming with me." "Me? Why?" "Because no one knows you," Nikolai said. "To them you are just a pretty face on my arm. You are invisible. While I distract Moretti, you will circulate. You will listen. You speak French, Russian, and English. You will hear what the wives and the lawyers are whispering." Galina clapped her hands from her armchair. Finally, someone to dress up. "Dimitri, get the stylists." The next 2 hours were a blur of silk and hairspray when Elena finally stood before the full-length mirror. She didn't recognize herself. The stylist had put her in a floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet slit up the thigh. It was backless, exposing the pale curve of her spine. Her hair was swept up in an intricate shiny, revealing the long line of her neck. She looked expensive, dangerous. She walked down the grand staircase. Nikolai was waiting at the bottom. He was adjusting his cufflinks, but he stopped when he saw her. His hands fell to his sides. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just watched her descend, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Well?" Elena asked, feeling self-conscious. "Do I pass?" Nikolai stepped forward. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "You are not invisible anymore," he murmured. "This might be a problem." He offered her his arm. "Stay close to me tonight. You are not Elena the waitress. You are Elena, my fiancée." "Fiancée?" Elena choked. "It explains why you are with me," Nikolai said smoothly, "and it keeps other men from approaching you. Let's go." The gala was a sea of diamonds and corruption. The ballroom overlooked Lake Michigan, the black water reflecting the city lights. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and a live orchestra played Mozart. Elena felt the weight of the eyes on them. Nikolai Vulov was a celebrity in this world, feared, hated, and lusted after. As they walked through the crowd, the sea parted. "Don't look down," Nikolai whispered in her ear, his hand warm on the small of her back. "Look at them like you own them." They approached a group of men near the bar. In the center was a short, stout man with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Luca Moretti. Nikolai, Moretti boomed, spreading his arms. I didn't think you'd show terrible business about the shooting the other night. I hope your mother is well. The tension was instant. The air around them seemed to freeze. She's fine, Luca, Nikolai said, his voice light, but his eyes deadly. It takes more than a coward with a rifle to kill a Vulova. Moretti's smile twitched. A coward? Yes. If it had been my men, they wouldn't have missed. Is that a confession? Nikolai asked. It's a statement of quality, Moretti shot back. While the men engaged in their verbal fencing, Elena slipped away. I'm going to find a drink, darling, she said, squeezing Nikolai's arm. He gave her a subtle nod. Elena moved through the crowd. Shh. He wasn't looking for a drink. She was hunting. She drifted near the groups of Moretti's lieutenants listening. She heard complaints about the union gossip about mistresses, but nothing about the hit. Then she heard it. It came from the balcony door, which was slightly ajar. A voice, low, urgent, and speaking Russian. Elena froze. Moretti's men were Italian. They spoke Italian or English. Who was speaking Russian? She grabbed a glass of champagne as a prop and stepped out onto the cool, windy balcony. It was empty SCE for two men standing in the shadows of a pillar. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. He suspects nothing, one voice said. It was deep growly. Nikolai is focused on Moretti. He thinks it's a turf war. Good, a second voice replied. Elena's heart stopped. She recognized that voice. It was smooth, slightly nasal. It sounded like the Vole family lawyer, or maybe an accountant. She couldn't place the face, but the voice was familiar from the estate. When do we strike? The first voice asked. Tonight. When they return to the estate. The security codes have been changed. The west gate will be open. We take out Nikolai. We take out the old witch. And the city is ours. The syndicate in Moscow is tired of Nikolai's independence. Elena gasped. It wasn't Moretti. It was a coup. A takeover from Russia. She turned to run back inside, but her heel caught on the stone pavement. She stumbled and her champagne glass shattered on the floor. The two men spun around. Who is there? Elena didn't wait. She bolted back into the ballroom. Hey! She pushed through the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to get to Nikolai. She had to get him out of there. They were walking into a trap. She spotted him across the room, still talking to Moretti. She abandoned all decorum and ran to him, grabbing his arm. We have to leave, she breathless. Now, Nikolai looked at her annoyed. Elena, I am in the middle of Nikolai. Please, she whispered, digging her nails into his tuxedo jacket. It's a trap, not here. Home. They're waiting for us at home. She spoke the last part in Russian, using a specific code word for ambush she had learned from her father. Nikolai went rigid. He looked at her eyes and saw the terror. He didn't question her. He didn't hesitate. He turned to Moretti. Apologies, Luca. My fiancée is feeling unwell. We must go. Before Moretti could answer, Nikolai was guiding her toward the exit, his grip on her arm bruising. Talk, he commanded as they hit the cool night air. What did you hear? It's not Moretti, Elena hissed as they reached the valet. It's the Russians, the Moscow syndicate. Someone on the inside changed the security codes at your estate. They're hitting the west gate tonight. Nikolai stopped. The valet brought the car around the Ferrari this time, not the armored SUV. Nikolai looked at her. The west gate codes are only known by 3 people. Me, my mother, and Dmitri. Elena felt sick. Dmitri, the man who had been by Nikolai's side for 10 years. He was on the balcony, Elena realized the growly voice. It was Dmitri. Nikolai's face turned into a mask of stone. He opened the car door for her. Get in, he said. Where are we going? Elena asked. We can't go home. No, Nikolai said, revving the engine. The roar of the Ferrari echoed off the buildings. We are going to the estate, but we aren't going in through the west gate. He pulled a silver handgun from the glove compartment and placed it in his lap. We are going to kill them all, Nikolai said. And you, Elena, are going to stay in the car. No, Elena said, buckling her seatbelt. I'm coming with you. If Dmitri is the traitor, he knows your moves. He doesn't know mine. Nikolai looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. The waitress was gone. The Queen was rising. "Fine," he said, shifting into gear. "But if you die, I will kill you myself." The drive back to Highland Park was done in silence at 120 miles per hour. Nikolai killed the headlights a mile before the estate. He drove by moonlight, guiding the low sports car off the main road and onto an old service trail that cut through the forest surrounding the property. "How do you know this road?" Elena asked, gripping the dashboard. "I used to sneak out this way when I was a teenager," Nikolai said grimly. "Dmitri doesn't know about it. He thinks I'm a disciplined soldier. He forgets I was a rebellious child first." They parked the car in the thick brush. The estate loomed ahead, dark and silent, too silent. The perimeter lights were off. "They've cut the power," Nikolai whispered. He checked his gun. "Stay behind me. Step where I step." They moved through the woods like shadows. Elena's velvet dress snagged on thorns, but she didn't care. She was focused on the house. They reached the perimeter wall. Nikolai pushed aside a heavy ivy vine, revealing a small rusted iron door. He punched in a code on a mechanical keypad. It clicked open. They slipped into the gardens. Inside the estate, it was a slaughterhouse. Two of Nikolai's loyal guards were lying by the fountain, their throats cut. Nikolai knelt by them, checking for pulses. Nothing. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "They are in the house," Nikolai whispered. "They will be going for my mother's room on the second floor." They entered through the kitchen. It was pitch black. Nikolai moved with the familiarity of a man navigating his own soul. Elena followed, her senses heightened to a painful degree. They reached the grand hallway. Suddenly the lights flickered on. "Welcome home, brother." Nikolai and Elena froze. Standing at the top of the stairs was Dmitri. He was holding a glass of Nikolai's best scotch in one hand and a heavy assault rifle in the other. Behind him stood 6 men, mercenaries, dressed in tactical gear. Nikolai didn't raise his gun. He knew he was outgunned. "Dmitri," Nikolai said, his voice calm, conversational. "I see you found the reserve whiskey." "It's good," Dmitri smiled. It was a cruel, twisted smile. "Tastes like power. You've been weak, Nikolai. You let the Italians walk all over us. You let this American waitress live in our house. Moscow is unhappy. So Moscow bought you." Nikolai took a step forward, shielding Elena with his body. "How much was my life worth?" "Dmitri, 10 million 20, the promise of the throne," Dmitri said. He looked at Elena. "And the girl, she's a loose end or maybe a spy." Dmitri pulled a folder from his belt and threw it down the stairs. It landed at Nikolai's feet. Papers spilled out. "Photos. I did some digging while you were playing dress-up." Dmitri sneered. "Elena Vance. Real name Elena Vance, daughter of Arthur Vance." Nikolai looked down at the photos. They showed a man, Elena's father, shaking hands with CIA agents. Headlines about diplomat Vance expels Russian mob from Estonia. Nikolai went still. The air left the room. He turned to Elena. The betrayal in his eyes was worse than the guns pointed at them. "Is it true?" Nikolai asked. His voice was broken. "Nikolai, listen," Elena pleaded, tears springing to her eyes. "My father was a diplomat. Yes, he fought the Bratva, but he's dead. He died broke in disgrace because your people framed him. I didn't come here to spy. I came here to pay my brother's medical bills. I didn't know who you were until I saw you in the club." "Liar!" Dmitri shouted. "She's a plant, Nikolai. She's been feeding intel to the feds. That's how she knew about the sniper. She set it up." "No!" Elena screamed. "I saved your mother." "Enough!" Nikolai roared. He looked at Elena, then back at Dmitri. He was trapped between a traitor and a liar. "Dmitri," Nikolai said slowly, "if she is a spy, why is she standing here with me unarmed, while you have a rifle pointed at my chest?" "Because she's good." Dmitri shrugged. "Kill them both." Dmitri raised the rifle. Click. Nothing happened. Dmitri frowned. He pulled the trigger again. Click. "You forgot something, Dmitri," Nikolai said. A dark smile spreading across his face. "What?" Dmitri panicked, looking at his gun. "I'm the one who buys the weapons," Nikolai said. "And I installed biometric locks on the armory rifles this morning. They only fire for my fingerprints." Dmitri's eyes went wide. The 6 mercenaries behind him realized the mistake. They reached for their sidearms, but they were too slow. Nikolai raised his silver pistol and fired. Bang, bang, bang. 3 mercenaries dropped shot in the head with terrifying precision. Sion! Run! Elena screamed, grabbing a heavy vase and smashing it over the head of a mercenary who was rushing Nikolai. The hallway erupted into chaos. Nikolai was a whirlwind of violence. He didn't just shoot. He moved like a dancer, dodging bullets and using the mercenaries as human shields. Elena wasn't a soldier, but she was a survivor. She scrambled under a table as bullets shredded the wood. She saw a loose gun sliding across the floor, a Glock dropped by one of the fallen guards. She dove for it. Dmitri had abandoned his jammed rifle and pulled a knife, a jagged combat blade. He lunged at Nikolai, tackling him to the ground. The 2 men rolled, crashing into the grandfather clock. Nikolai was strong, but Dmitri was desperate. He pinned Nikolai down, raising the knife to plunge it into the Don's throat. "For Moscow!" Dmitri screamed. Bang! Dmitri jerked. He looked down. A red flower was blooming on his chest. He turned his head slowly. Elena was standing there, the Glock shaking in her hands, smoke rising from the barrel. She had shot him. Dmitri coughed, blood spilling from his lips. He looked at Elena, then at Nikolai. She really is. Dmitri gurgled. He collapsed dead on top of Nikolai. Nikolai shoved the body off him and stood up. He was panting, his tuxedo-torn blood, not his own, splattered across his white shirt. He looked at the dead mercenaries. Then he looked at Elena. She dropped the gun. She was shaking violently. She had just killed a man. Nikolai walked over to her. He didn't hug her. He didn't thank her. He picked up the folder. Dmitri had thrown the file on her father. He looked at it, then looked at her. Arthur Vance was a good man, Nikolai said quietly. He was the only one my father respected. He was an honorable enemy. Elena sobbed, the adrenaline crashing. I'm not a spy, Nikolai. I swear I just wanted to save my brother. Nikolai stepped closer. He reached out and took her face in his hands. His thumbs wiped away her tears. I know, Nikolai said. A spy would have let Dmitri kill me. He leaned his forehead against hers. You are not a waitress, he whispered. You are not a spy. You are a Vulov. You have blood on your hands now, Elena. There is no going back. I don't want to go back, Elena whispered, looking into his ice-blue eyes. Good, Nikolai said. He kissed her. It was a kiss of war, of blood, and of possession. It tasted like iron and victory. But the moment was shattered by a sound from upstairs, a crash. Mama, Nikolai said, pulling away. They ran up the stairs to Galina's room. The door was kicked open. The room was empty. The balcony doors were open, the curtains fluttering in the wind. On the bed was a note pinned to the pillow with a dagger. Nikolai grabbed it. Elena read it over his shoulder. It was written in Russian. You survived the traitor. Now come for the king. If you want your mother back, come to the old foundry alone. The syndicate. Nikolai crumpled the note in his fist. His eyes turned black. They took her, Nikolai said, his voice sounding like the cracking of a glacier. They took my mother. He turned to Elena. The game is over, he said. Now we hunt. The old foundry was a skeletal ruin of rusted steel and broken glass on the outskirts of the city. It was where the Vulov Empire had started 50 years ago, and tonight it was where Nikolai intended to end the Moscow syndicate. He entered through the ventilation shafts, a route Elena had spotted on the blueprints she found on Nikolai's phone. While Nikolai was a hammer, Elena was a scalpel. They found them in the main smelting room. Galina was tied to a chair in the center of the floor. Standing over her was Viktor Klov, the head of the Moscow syndicate, flanked by 10 heavily armed men. You are late, Nikolai, Klov shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls. He pressed a pistol to Galina's temple. I expected more urgency for your mother. Nikolai stepped out of the shadows, his hands raised, his tuxedo ruined and blood-stained. I am here, Viktor. Let her go. This is between us. It is, Kosov sneered. But the woman dies anyway. She is a relic, and you are a disappointment. Hidden in the catwalks above, Elena watched through the grate. She had the Glock Nikolai had given her. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. It was a chessboard. Nikolai was the king drawing the enemy's fire. Galina was the piece to be rescued. Kov was the opponent's king. She couldn't shoot Kov. He was using Galina as a shield. She had to force him to move. Elena scanned the room. She saw a pressure valve on the steam pipe directly behind Kov. It was old, rusted, and held together by a single bolt. She took a breath. She aimed not at the men but at the pipe crack. The bullets sparked off the metal, shattering the valve. A jet of scalding hot steam exploded outward with a deafening screech, blasting directly into Kov's back. Kloof screamed, stumbling forward away from the scalding heat. In that split second of separation, he was no longer shielding Galina. Nikolai didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon with blinding speed. Bang! Bang! 2 shots to the chest. Kov dropped before he even hit the ground. Now! Nikolai roared. Elena rained fire from above, suppressing the remaining guards while Nikolai sprinted to his mother. He cut her bonds with a knife, shielding her with his body as they returned fire. The remaining mercenaries, leaderless and terrified of the ghost in the rafters, threw down their weapons and fled. Nikolai held his mother. For the first time, the Iron Lady looked small. "Are you hurt?" Nikolai asked in Russian. "My pride," Galina rasped, straightening her spine. She looked up at the catwalks. "Where is the girl?" Elena climbed down the ladder, exhausted, covered in soot. She walked toward them. Nikolai stood up. He walked over to her, and in front of his mother and the ruins of his enemies, he dropped to one knee, not to propose, but to bow. "You are not my pawn," Nikolai said, taking her hand. "You are my queen." 6 months later, the Onyx Room was closed for a private event. The tables were gone, replaced by a sea of white roses. Elena stood by the window, watching the snow fall on Chicago. She wore a dress of white lace, but hidden beneath the garter on her thigh was a small pearl-handled dagger. Old habits died hard. Nervous? Nikolai appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No." Elena smiled, leaning into him. "I was just thinking about the chess game. You still haven't beaten me." "I have a lifetime to try," Nikolai whispered, kissing her neck. Galina sat in the front row holding a cup of tea. It was made perfectly bitter strong with a hint of mint. Next to her sat Leo, Elena's brother, fully recovered and looking healthy, wearing a suit Nikolai had bought. Him. The doors opened. The city's elite, the remaining mob bosses, and the politicians all stood up. They weren't just standing for a bride, they were standing for the new power of the underworld. The Waitress and the Wolf. Elena took Nikolai's hand. They walked down the aisle together, ready to rule the city. Checkmate. What a ride. From a terrified waitress spilling tea to the queen of the Chicago underworld, Elena Vance proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices. She didn't just survive the Mafia. She conquered it with her mind, her courage, and a little bit of chess strategy. Nikolai Vulov found the one thing he never respected an equal. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance, danger, and karmic justice, please destroy that like button. It helps the channel so much. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Question for you guys. If you were Elena, would you have taken the money and run, or stayed to fight for Nikolai? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.